She was cleaning her rifle when the general asked her to show the recruits how it's really done. "Corporal Mara," he said, though no one could remember when she'd last worn a rank. "Demonstrate the full strip and inspection." Mara's hands moved before thought. She checked the chamber, pointed safe, locked the bolt. She spoke as she worked, voice steady, not loud. "First rule, respect the sun on a clear day. Shadows hide grit. If you're sloppy, the light will tell on you." She nodded at a private whose sling was twisted. "Undo that. If your strap bites your shoulder, your focus shifts. Clean gear, clear mind." The general folded his arms and watched like a man who'd set a test he already knew the answer to. Mara separated receiver from stock, laid out pins and springs on a rag like little planets in precise orbits. She ran the brush only forward, never back, and told them why. "You don't push filth where it came from. You usher it out into the bright." Someone smirked, and her look cut it short. Gentle, not cruel, but final, like a door settling into frame. "You think cleaning is a low task," she said. "But this is where reliability is born. On sunny days, truth has nowhere to hide. Learn to like that." She finished the first pass. Solvent shimmered, steel flashed. In the sheen, she saw the ghost of a younger version of herself. A fighter no one here guessed at, a set of choices locked away like spare parts in a sealed tin. Mara picked up the gauge. "Tolerances," she said. "You can feel good and still be wrong. Measure anyway." The room breathed with her cadence, a tide finding its rhythm. The world outside stayed bright as a hell breath. She pointed to the bore like a teacher tracing a coastline. "Light test," she murmured, angling the barrel until the sun poured down it like a river. "See that clean spiral? No shadows, no streaking. If you see a dim ring, that's residue. It will betray you the hour you need precision." Someone asked if that ever really mattered. Mara smiled in a way that made the question feel smaller. Every contest is decided by little margins. On bright days, the margins glare. She pressed an oiled patch through and let them smell the metal coming back to life. The general's eyes softened, the way a commander's will when memory taps his shoulder. "Continue," he said. Mara reassembled the rifle with patient certainty, the parts seating with small sunlit clicks that sounded like confidence. "Function check," she said, and when the mechanism cycled smooth as breath, even the skeptic in the back nodded once, almost despite himself. "Again," the general said, and they did, following her hands into the work. The recruits leaned in now, no longer just watching out of duty, but because something about Mara's movements refused to let them look away. Sunlight slipped across her cheek, glinting off the fine film of oil on her fingers. Every step she took was measured, unhurried, yet faster than they could track if they blinked. A private tried to copy her. He fumbled the retaining pin, dropped it onto the floor, and cursed under his breath. Mara bent down, picked it up before he could, and placed it back in his palm. "Slow down," she said. "The rifle is patient. If you aren't, you'll teach it to betray you." The general didn't correct her. He didn't need to. He simply stood with arms folded, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. He'd known. He'd always known. The room was quiet except for the small metallic sounds. A bolt sliding home, a brush whisking forward, a spring compressing. The rhythm grew like a heartbeat, steady, almost meditative. Mara guided them, not with bark commands, but with sentences that stuck like small hooks. "Balance your breathing with the stroke of the brush. Inhale, push. Exhale, reset. Let your lungs train your hands." They did as she said, almost unconsciously. A corporal at the end of the row wiped sweat from his brow and realized he'd been breathing exactly in time with her voice. One recruit whispered to another, "She's done this before." Mara heard. She didn't flinch. Instead, she lifted her gaze, eyes catching theirs like a bright reflection in the bore. "I've done this more times than you've counted birthdays," she said evenly. Then softer, and every time the sun was shining. The general's eyebrow rose. The young soldiers exchanged glances. Who exactly was this cleaning assistant? Mara had no insignia, no ribbons, no patches on her fatigues beyond the plain name tape. Yet the way she handled the rifle had the gravity of someone who knew not just the weapon, but the weight of decisions tied to it. She took one recruit's rifle, held it up, and pointed at a faint smudge by the locking lugs. "This looks clean to you." But under sunlight, the residue glares back. Dirt never hides forever. It waits. And when you need the weapon to answer, it won't. The recruit flushed, nodded, and cleaned again with more care. Mara leaned back slightly, watching them work. For a moment, her mind flickered elsewhere, heat shimmering above desert sand, the staccato rattle of rifles in a valley where the sun never showed mercy. She pushed aside. The recruits didn't need ghosts. They needed discipline. One bolder private asked, "Where did you learn all this?" Mara wiped the rag across the receiver, eyes narrowing for half a breath. Then she smiled, thin but kind. "Let's just say the world taught me. Some lessons stick deeper when the sun is burning over your shoulder and the margin for error is a single breath." The general cleared his throat lightly, as if to remind them not to pry too far. But curiosity was rising like heat on the pavement. Mara set the rifle down and clasped her hands. "You want to know the truth?" she said quietly. The recruits straightened as though bracing for a classified revelation. Her smile deepened, but it held no mockery. "The truth is, respect the small tasks. Rifles don't care about ranks. They don't care about medals. They only care if you respected them enough to make them ready when the sun rises on the day you need them most." The silence after her words was heavier than before. Even the general looked as though he were remembering an old battlefield where sunlight was both blessing and curse. The recruits cleaned with new focus now, not because they were told to, but because something inside them had shifted. Mara glanced out the window. The sky was still painfully bright, cloudless. "All right," she said. "Now that your rifles can breathe, let's see if you can." And with that, she stood. The recruits froze, rifles in hand, wondering what was coming next. Mara set the freshly cleaned rifle down on the table with a quiet finality. The recruits expected her to dismiss them, maybe nod approval, maybe walk back to her little desk with the logbooks. Instead, she straightened to her full height, shoulders rolling back, and her presence filled the room in a way they hadn't felt before. "Cleaning," she said, "is only half the life of a rifle. The other half begins when you put it to your shoulder." The recruits blinked. Some shifted uneasily. Wasn't this supposed to be a maintenance lecture? The general said nothing, only gestured slightly with his chin. "Continue." Mara reached for the same rifle she had just oiled. With practiced ease, she racked the bolt, locked it back, and dropped in a bright dummy round from a small pouch at her belt. Where had that come from? None of them had noticed her carrying it. "Step 1, she said, turning toward the recruits. "Respect the chamber as you respected the bore. Even when the sun is shining, treat every shadow inside this weapon as if it hides danger." She snapped the rifle to her shoulder. The movement was fluid, precise, beautiful in its economy. The recruits inhaled as one. This was not the awkward shuffle of clerk. This was the seamless motion of someone who had done it under pressure, with sweat stinging eyes and lives depending on it. "Sight picture," she continued. "A clear view is useless if your mind shakes. Control breath, control thought. The rifle magnifies your discipline, or your lack of it." Her finger traced the trigger, resting, never jerking. Then snap. The dry fire cracked like a whip in the silent room. A couple of recruits jumped. Mara lowered the rifle, her eyes steady. "You hear that? That's the sound of confidence, not the sound of chance." One recruit blurted, "Ma'am, were you ever?" He trailed off, words lost under the weight of his own question. She tilted her head. "Ever what?" No one answered. The general's gaze swept the room, silencing them, but Mara's faint smile said more than any medal could. She moved to the nearest recruit. "Shoulder," she commanded softly. He obeyed, fumbling. She adjusted his stance with a light push of her hand. "Feet shoulder width. Lean forward, not back. The sun doesn't wait for you to find balance. Be ready when it rises." He nodded, trying again. Better this time. One by one, she moved down the line, correcting posture, grip, cheek weld. Her voice was never harsh, but each correction landed like stones set in a foundation. The recruits listened harder than they had in weeks of shouted drills. Finally, she stepped back, let them hold their weapons in silence. Outside, sunlight blazed against the walls, hot and unwavering. Inside, a different heat grew, the slow burn of realization that this rifle-cleaning assistant was something far greater. The general broke the silence. "Continue, Corporal." Her eyes flickered at the old rank. She hadn't heard it in years, and the sound pulled memories like film strips across her mind. Sandy hills, the bite of cordite, orders whispered under fire. She steadied herself. "Field reload," she said simply. She pulled a magazine from nowhere, slid it in, cycled the bolt in a single smooth rhythm. Time is a thief. Don't let it rob you. The recruits tried. Metal clattered, fingers slipped, magazines jammed. Mara didn't scold. She guided. She showed. She repeated, faster, smoother, until their movements began to mimic hers, hesitant but improving. When the exercise paused, sweat glistened on brows, though the only battle was with themselves. Mara looked across the faces, young, untested, proud, skeptical, but now softened by something they couldn't name. She knew that look. She'd once worn it herself. "Again," she said, and the rifles snapped, clacked, and cycled under the relentless rhythm of a woman who was no assistant at all, but a fighter the sun itself seemed to acknowledge. By the time the rifles clicked through their third cycle of reload drills, the recruits' arms ached. Sweat rolled down temples, dripping onto stocks and uniforms. Yet not one of them asked for a break. Mara hadn't raised her voice once, but her presence commanded them more surely than any shouted order. She set her rifle down, eyes glinting in the sunlight that cut across the room. "Weapons aren't just steel," she said. "They're stories. Every scratch, every scar, every burn mark is a memory written in metal." A recruit frowned. "How do you know?" Mara turned the rifle barrel up, pointing to a faint pit near the handguard. Her thumb traced it lightly. "This one, too much sand in the chamber. Took me 3 hours in the heat to dig it clean." Another time, dust storm came out of nowhere, and half the unit jammed their rifles. Mine didn't. It was the difference between holding ground and not. The recruits went still. The word she hadn't spoken, losing, hung in the air. Another voice, quieter this time. "You were there?" "In combat." Mara's lips tightened, then softened. Combat is a word people use when they haven't felt it. Out there under the sun, it's just survival. You, your rifle, and whether you cared enough to prepare. She didn't give them time to press further. She stepped forward, scooped a handful of dummy rounds from the table, and let them spill through her fingers with a metallic jingle. Speed comes last. First comes precision. A rifle loaded carelessly is a lie waiting to betray you. They tried again, loading slowly, carefully. Mara moved among them, correcting, adjusting, her hands steady as a surgeon's. Every so often, a phrase slipped out that didn't belong to an assistant. "Don't tuck your elbow like that. It'll cost you seconds when you're pinned behind stone. Feel the magazine's seat, don't force it." Once a recruit did and cracked the lip. He didn't live long enough to regret it. Sight picture, even indoors. Train your eyes to see straight through sun glare. The day it matters, you'll thank yourself. Each sentence carried weight, echoes of places and moments the recruits couldn't imagine. They glanced at each other, half in awe, half in disbelief. The general remained silent, but his eyes told the truth. He knew exactly what Mara was doing, and he approved. Finally, she called him a halt. The room smelled of oil and effort, metallic and sharp. She leaned against the table, crossing her arms. "You think soldiering is about glory," she said softly. "It isn't. It's about responsibility. When the sun rises tomorrow, you'll carry this weapon. Ask yourself, are you its master, or are you its liability?" The recruits shifted uncomfortably. None of them wanted to be the liability she spoke of. For a moment, Mara let herself drift. She saw faces, the ones who hadn't come back, the ones whose rifles had jammed, whose discipline had slipped. She heard voices carried on desert wind, saw the blinding glare of sunlight off enemy scopes. Then she blinked, pulling herself back. They didn't need her ghosts. They needed her strength. She picked up the rifle again, cycling it with a single smooth motion. "All right," she said, voice crisp. "We've talked about cleaning, about handling. Now we talk about trust. Trust between you and this weapon." Her gaze swept across the room, holding each recruit in turn. "And maybe, if you listen closely enough, you'll learn something about trust between each other, too." The room stayed utterly still. Even the sunlight, streaming hot through the windows, seemed to pause to hear what would come next. The recruits were restless now, caught between awe and unease. Mara could feel it in the way they gripped their rifles, tighter than before, as if afraid they might lose something intangible she had awakened in them. She let the silence stretch until it pressed on them like the noonday sun outside. Then she reached into her pocket and drew out a strip of black cloth. Without a word, she tied it around her eyes. The recruits stiffened. A murmur ran down the line. The general's lips twitched, but he didn't stop her. "You think you know your weapon," Mara said, voice steady in the half-dark behind the blindfold. "But do you know it well enough to feel it in your bones? When the sun blinds you, when smoke burns your eyes, when chaos erases every point of reference, can you still trust it?" Before they could answer, her hand were moving. Click! Out came the magazine. Clack! The bolt slid free. Tiny metallic notes sang in sequence as she stripped the rifle down piece by piece, each motion flowing into the next without hesitation. The recruits leaned forward, jaws slack. She worked faster than they could follow even with sight. Springs rolled across the cloth, pins clicked against wood, and yet not a single part fell out of her control. Her fingers knew every ridge, every groove, every whisper of weight. In less than 2 minutes, the rifle lay disassembled in perfect order. Mara removed the blindfold, eyes blinking against the sunlight streaming through the windows. She looked at their stunned faces. "Assembly," she said simply. And then it began again, this time even faster. Her hands flew like a pianist's, seating pins, locking springs, aligning steel with the precision of long habit. She didn't need to look. She listened, to the click of a pin seating right, to the slide of the bolt catching true. When the final snap echoed, the rifle was whole. She racked the action, pulled the trigger. Snap. The sound cracked through the room like the slap of sunlight on glass. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. One private whispered, "That's impossible." Mara raised an eyebrow. "Impossible is just what you call something you haven't practiced enough." The general finally spoke. His voice was quiet but carried across the room. "Recruits, what you've just seen isn't magic. It's discipline. Years of it. And discipline doesn't care about rank or title. It belongs to whoever chooses it." The recruits nodded, shame flickering across a few faces that had earlier smirked at the idea of a cleaning assistant. Mara stepped closer to them, setting the rifle on the table with deliberate care. "This isn't about me," she said. "This is about you. If you learn to trust your weapon blind, you'll never fear the light or the dark. You'll never let the sun glare blind you or panic steal your hands. You'll be ready." A long pause. Then one of the youngest recruits raised his rifle, voice trembling but firm. "Can you teach us to do that?" Mara's gaze softened. She remembered being that young, eager, scared, desperate for someone to light the path. She nodded. "Yes, but not today. Today you've learned what discipline looks like. Tomorrow, you'll begin to feel it in your own hands." The general's expression eased into something rare, almost proud. He gave a curt nod. Mara turned back to the recruits. "For now, remember this. Never underestimate what looks ordinary. The sun makes every flaw obvious, but it also makes hidden strength shine. Respect both." The recruits didn't cheer, didn't clap. They only stood straighter, as though some invisible weight had been lifted and replaced with another, heavier one they were willing to carry. Outside, the sun blazed brighter, but inside, something deeper had ignited. The armory door creaked open, and the sunlight outside hit like a wave. The recruits squinted, raising hands to shade their eyes. Heat shimmered off the parade ground, the air vibrating with cicadas. Mara stepped out first, rifle slung across her shoulder as naturally as a shadow. Inside, it's easy, she said over her shoulder. Cool shade, quiet, no pressure. But war doesn't happen in shade. It happens here, in the glare, when the sun feels like it's watching every mistake you make. The general followed at a distance, silent, allowing her to take command. The recruits trailed behind, rifles heavy in their hands, boots crunching against gravel. Mara stopped in the center of the square and turned. Form a line. They scrambled into place, uneven at first until her raised eyebrow corrected them. She pointed to a stretch of open ground, the far end marked with wooden dummies and rusted barrels. Lesson 3. Trust under pressure. You've cleaned. You've handled. Now you'll use. The recruits stiffened. None had expected to fire today, but Mara's tone left no room for doubt. She snapped a magazine into her rifle, chambered around with a sharp, confident clack. Watch closely. Then she moved. Her stride was smooth, but her speed caught them off guard. She advanced across the gravel. Rifle rising in one fluid arc, sunlight flashed along the barrel as if the day itself was pointing out her precision. Crack! A dummy's head splintered. Crack! Another shot, perfect center mass. She pivoted, fired again, dropped to one knee, cycled, and struck the smallest target clean through. 3 shots. 3 hits. The echo bounced across the sunlit walls. Mara lowered her rifle. That wasn't about speed. That was about clarity. You think the sun blinds you. It doesn't. It shows you everything if you learn to see through it. The recruits exchanged glances. A few grinned despite themselves. Others swallowed hard. One by one, she called them forward. Each had to walk the same line under her watch. They stumbled, fumbled reloads, missed shots, cursed under their breath. But Mara corrected them patiently, never raising her voice. Lean into the rifle. Don't let it shove you. Breathe with it, not against it. See past the glare. Trust your training, even if it's only been an hour. The general stood with arms folded, his face unreadable, though his eyes betrayed a quiet satisfaction. When the last recruit finished, sweat soaking through his shirt, Mara gathered them again in a half circle. You felt the sun on your face. You felt your nerves. That's good. Remember this. Fear isn't your enemy. It sharpens you. But panic will kill you. Her gaze swept across them, steady, fierce. Out there, no one cares if you're a recruit or a veteran. The rifle doesn't care either. The only thing that matters is whether you respected it enough to be ready. And readiness, she tapped her temple, then her chest. Begins here and here. The recruits nodded slowly, almost solemnly. The air felt heavier now, not from heat, but from meaning. The youngest among them whispered, "Ma'am, were you someone important before this?" Mara's expression didn't change, but her eyes softened. Important? No, I was just someone who learned the hard way. And if I can keep you from learning the hard way, then this sunlit day is worth it. The general finally stepped forward, his boots echoing against the ground. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned to the recruits. Never forget what you've seen. Lessons like these aren't in manuals. They're given. Consider today a gift. The recruits stood taller, as if the sunlight itself had burned new lines of resolve into their posture. Mara slung her rifle and started walking back toward the armory. Tomorrow, she called without turning, we'll see if you can shine brighter than the sun. The recruits watched her go, every one of them realizing they would never look at a simple assistant the same way again. By the time they filed back into the armory, the recruits were quiet in a way they hadn't been before. Not the silence of boredom, but the silence of men and women replaying every moment, every correction, every phrase that had burned into them out on that sunlit square. Mara set her rifle on the table, her hands moving automatically to wipe it down, though it hardly needed it. She always cleaned after firing, no matter how few shots. She had taught them that discipline wasn't for show. It was a habit. The recruits lingered, rifles in their arms, unsure if they should begin cleaning again or simply stand. The general solved it for them. You may dismiss, he he said, his voice carrying a weight of finality. But none of them moved. One of the older recruits cleared his throat, stepping forward. His cheeks were flushed, not from heat now, but from something deeper. "Ma'am," he said, almost stumbling over the word he'd never used for her before. "Thank you. For all of it." Another chimed in, then another. Soon it was a chorus, not loud, not formal, just earnest voices filling the room with gratitude. Words of thanks that came not from obligation, but from respect. Mara looked at them, at the sweat-stained uniforms, the rifles clutched a little differently now, more carefully, more deliberately. She felt something shift in her chest, a familiar ache she had buried long ago. The ache of belonging. She gave a small nod. "Don't thank me. Show me. Every time you pick up this weapon, every time you step into the sun, show me you listen today. That will be thanks enough." Her eyes caught the general's. For a heartbeat, there was a silent conversation, acknowledgement, recognition, an unspoken reminder that some legacies didn't need medals or titles to live on. The general stepped closer, his tone softer than the recruits had ever heard. "You've done more than teach them to clean a rifle," he said. "You've taught them to respect it, and themselves. That's a lesson many never learn." Mara allowed herself a thin smile. "Then my work here is done." She gathered her rag, solvent, and brush, returning them to the little kit that had been her cover for so long. But to the recruits, it no longer looked like the tools of a simple assistant. They looked like the tools of a fighter, a survivor, a teacher who carried battles in her bones and chose to share the wisdom instead of the scars. As the recruits filed out, the sunlight caught each of their rifles, gleaming like mirrors. They looked back at her, some offering sharp salutes, others just small, respectful nods. No one smirked anymore. No one whispered doubt. And from that day forward, none of them ever underestimated anyone based on their profession again. For they had learned, under the bright and merciless sun, that greatness often hides in plain sight, in the quiet discipline of someone cleaning a rifle.